You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Barco, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you with us today. And today's special guest has got a story to share that's not only timely, but insightful and rich with living experience and very hard-won resiliency. Australian-born from parents of Dutch, Scottish and in Aboriginal descent, he grew up in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne in the late 70s and 80s, where he experienced what seemed to be daily discrimination in those cruel early years of his youth. Given he was one of a very few kids of colour, dark skin, he used his own words, in a heavily white populated community, and to quote Steve, surrounded by a culture of meat pie and peas. Yep, I hear it. He says that growing up at times was brutal, experiencing both verbal and at times physical abuse. School was tough for Steve, and not only had to navigate the racial difficulties, but an undiagnosed dyslexia that only added to his distress and subsequent class clown, acting out and troublemaking status, which ended up seeing him expelled. After leaving technical school, Steve commenced an apprenticeship in a printing industry where he remained until his mid-30s, where at this age he found his passion in a call to community service. This new career transition led him to further studies and into chaplaincy as well as pastoral care practitioner. Continuing service saw Steve become a family violence prevention worker in his local Aboriginal community, running men's behavioural change and therapeutic programs that safely address and challenge areas in men's behaviour for positive, permanent change and outcomes. Steve is currently working in aged care as a pastoral and spiritual care practitioner and does volunteer his time throughout various community programs in several Indigenous communities. Steve is a hubby and a very young granddad. Steve Butler, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Good to have you here.
It's great to be here, Shane. Thank you very much for having me.
Fantastic. Love where you're sitting, my friend. I'm a little bit jealous looking at that backdrop. Wow, that's your backyard, I'm assuming.
It is. It's a privilege to live here. It's only hop, skip and a jump away from suburbia, just down the road. But on top of the hill here, where I am in the Dandenong Ranges,
beautiful.
We get it all going on. You know, all the wildlife is here, and I am welcomed by them every morning by their little songs of praise as they all wake up.
Fantastic. For those listeners, our subscribers who are international, you might get to hear a kookaburra going off, which we're handy. So a little bit of a native Australian animal experience for our listeners from overseas. But yeah, good to have you here, mate. Thanks for that. And look, let's kick in about the whole class clown and troublemaker thing. I think I just want to start there because as I shared in your introduction, it's really tricky, and young men particularly struggle anyway with early learning difficulties. I know at school I was a little bit like that as well. And again, kids, young men particularly, can act out when they're feeling depressed. That manifests in different ways, and obviously anger is one of those. But yeah, being a class clown, trying to draw a positive attention rather than negative attention to yourself, particularly if you have learning difficulties, because you don't want to look stupid. You feel stupid already, though you're not. So therefore you start doing things to make yourself look whatever. So look, tell our listeners a little bit about what were some of the factors that added to that, look, particularly around that early abuse. I can imagine, and a person that has been bullied, but I've never been bullied because of my skin colour. I've never been bullied because of my culture. And that's a whole different animal. Tell us a little bit about how that shaped you as a young person.
Well, it certainly it questioned a lot about the culture because it was so discriminated against. It questioned a lot about who we were as a people and who the Aboriginal people were from the past. It questioned where they would fit in with community, how they fit in community, were they even valid, and for a little young mind, an undeveloped, an uneducated mind, you would just live in the brutality of people's discrimination rather than being able to process it at the time. So really, the resilience that you that you developed was one of attack and one of defence, and you just spent those years just fighting back because you had to defend what you didn't even know why you were discriminated against. You were just called these names. You were always this person who was different, and so you just had to fight back, and you didn't really have an opportunity to process why that was. It's just that you knew you weren't liked for something that was completely out of my control. I mean, you don't choose who you're born. You don't choose where what time in life you come into it. You just got to learn to defend it, and later explore and celebrate it. But at that time, it was just about defence and attack.
Sure. So reaction, I get that, totally get that. The reactionary response is from a young teenage male, the whole idea is, well, hang on, I've got to manage this. And as you've said beautifully, you can't process that cognitively and culturally at that stage without support and input from older and wiser people who know the setting. Now, hopefully your teachers would have stepped in on their bullying framework and sort of challenged that a little bit, and maybe they did, maybe they didn't. If it was done publicly, and obviously they might have stepped in and said, hey, you can't treat this person this way. It may not be because you can't be racist, but at the same time you're actually trying to work through an identity development as well. So, as an Indigenous young man who's been discriminated against, at least in a bullying context, and that's, you're trying to process that reactionary sort of stuff. So you don't get a chance to do what you need to do without those inputs. Was there anybody just around you at that time, Steve, that was able to take the edge off that for you, that other than maybe your parents? Hopefully your parents did, but anyone else, that was outside of your cultural setting that looked in and said, hang on, this is kind of not appropriate. Did any of that manifest, or was it just really a survival journey for you?
Yeah, look, certainly there were people that stand out, and those people you remember forever, whether that's an influence coming from family or from the outside of the family. The seldom teacher that came along that did pay an interest into a misbehaving student or kid. There were very few and far between those that do make an effect, but they're the ones that you remember forever.
Beautiful.
When you're a young kid, especially coming from a community that the authorities were those that stood over you, dominated over you, controlled the situation, all that, you sort of remove yourself from trusting those authorities. So when one that wants to know you personally, wants to invest into you, as a mentor, as a coach, they stand out. So there was certainly those that blew in and out of my life, and I do remember the kindness that came from these people, and it was found in family, it was found in community, but for a troubled kid or a person who was considered a troublemaker, you're more sort of discriminated against by even the authorities that are in your life, your teachers and so on. Sure. They don't have the time, the patience or the care to want to invest in what it takes to actually build into someone who's carrying this sort of trauma, because for a lot of people it's hard work.
Yeah, and I hear that, and I think there's a double whammy going on here. Obviously, you've just said that there's a cultural factor which is very powerful, and perhaps not as well. Certainly wasn't paid as much attention to it as it is now. Back in the 70s and 80s, I remember that at school. I went to a country Victorian school, and we had one of my best mates was a Greek guy, and even that was kind of like he was one of the local wogs, and that was kind of the terminology used in an endearing term. It wasn't sort of slated and abused him. He was just one of. But that was the friendship I had, and I was a son of an immigrant myself. So although it was my mum was Dutch, so it didn't have the same issue as perhaps some of the other immigrants that were experiencing it. But on top of that, you've got that clear racial problem, which has got systemic issues behind it anyway. And then you've got the bullying and you've got the dyslexia. So just getting back to that, developing your persona, because obviously you're a burgeoning adult. That's the idea of all of us growing up. And adolescence is a 20th century Western cultural construct. Until the 20th century, basically, children were children until they hit puberty, then they went through rites of passages, and different cultures had different ones, and certainly the Australian Indigenous culture has a very powerful series of rites of passages for the young men. But then you become an adult and you take on adult responsibilities. But in the West, we have this kind of space called adolescence between sort of 12 and 13 and now 75, it appears. Mick Jagger's at 80-something, he's still thinking, I can't get any satisfaction. So it's fascinating to watch this adolescent space sort of grow where I can play. But I just wondered how you obviously got expelled in the end. What were the hallmarks that you carried, good and bad, from that? I want to investigate the bad first. I mean, what are some of the stigma, or if you like, that's a fashionable term, but what are some of the baggage from that really slowed you down coming as an adult? And then we'll talk about, what are some of the things that help shape you positively?
Well, I think when life and its development is long-winded because you're carrying so much pushback, if you like, rebellion, and you are not managing your poor behaviour, you miss a lot of time. You lose a lot of time to be able to invest in your own life in order to get ahead, in order to obtain a job and things. You just lose so much time, and in that time wasting, you still are busy with occupying yourself with probably habits and decisions that are not so healthy, because you're wasting so much time. You have this time now I can only speak for my life, and in my life, it was basically inappropriate behaviours and habits that I adopted before I made those lifestyle changes through circumstances, and we'll talk about that with the good. But when I reflect on some of the big major negatives about this was that big time wasting and what I wasted time with.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Does that make sense?
Good. Yeah. No, it's good. I think you're right. I think that this is one of the phenomena, again, in that adolescent space where play as a child continues, whereas previously under the old system, whereas you're a child then you're an adult, and so responsibilities and activities that pertain to adulthood were embraced and exercised and developed, whereas now with this continuing play, exploration, which can lead to, we have in our seminars, we talk a lot about the difference between rebellion and experimentation, and exploration and exploration. Exploration and can't remember the other bit.
Another big factor, though, Shane, if I can jump in with what's happened amongst Aboriginal communities, is that there's been a great loss of initiation into manhood, and so culturally, I had nothing that offered me the next stage in culture, through culture, the next stage as becoming a man, and so. With this as a passion, with this knowing that this is a loss, not maybe even being able to articulate or interpret it like that, but looking back, knowing that there was nothing culturally around me at that time that stood me into the next steps. Like, for instance, lots of cultures throughout the world have those next stages. Some do Holy Communion. They go into a next stage of their tradition and so on. Through colonisation, that has been so decimated, especially in the community and the region that I lived in stepping into that manhood, those initiations, those next steps, those understanding the laws and all these things, you become lawless.
Yep.
And both in spirit, mind and attitude and behaviour. And so therefore, again, for my life, it wasn't until much later when I did start to mix with cultural mentors and start to be influenced this way that I started to think about and educate myself around what do these next steps mean for me.
Perfect.
But one of the, but definitely a part of the great damage was that all those initiations to the next stages had been decimated. Not just through colonisation, but because of the impacts of colonisation that flowed into all the communities around us. I mean, there were both white and black that had experienced a great loss on what those respecting your elders meant and all those fundamentals and principles of moving to the next stage. It was just like it was a loss for all communities for how I saw it.
Yeah, no, and I think you're spot on there. I think, again, rites of passage existed in different cultures in different ways and different manifestations. And you're right, so the 20th century shifted that, and even in Western white European culture, they still had, and again, until the 20th century, very clear rites of passage. As I said, you're a child until you hit puberty, then you're an adult, and you were apprenticed into workspaces, and schooling was an apprenticeship, and so you ended up with those responsibilities. Where Indigenous culture had perhaps more specific one, and some of the Western cultures had a strong Judeo-Christian background as well. So what that meant, there was a lot of those rites of passage geared to that religious framework, which have also been completely excised from the culture. From the dominant culture anyway. So it's interesting you say with this progressive sort of culture that says, we can lose all these considered primitive rituals and pretend that we can and not replace them with anything, and then wonder why development of young men and young women particularly, but young men particularly is a problematic issue. But we won't get in that road today on that one. It's a big subject.
It's funny to notice though that we still call it law.
Yeah, beautiful.
You know, amongst Aboriginal communities, it's still law. It's still considered law. LORE.
Correct. Yep.
And also the laws of the land are just as important. Not necessarily, and as you said, we won't get into it, but there are things that give us structure and meaning and purpose, but also safety and boundary.
Perfect.
And once we remove them, well.
Yep. Foundations, boundaries, all that sort of stuff. Again, we have a lot of series around that with our particular Humpty Dumpty Dilemma resiliency building program. We talk about that at length in our Worldview and the Wheelbarrow series for those very reasons, because the cultural psyche as well as the individual psyche, it can survive barely on scaffolding, but it needs good foundations to stand up and stand strong. Steve,
Sure.
but what about the positive? I mean, there may not have been, as you said, there's a couple of key actors in your world that you do remember. I don't need to talk about them specifically, unless of course you want to. But also bouncing out of that, the negatives, what now? Maybe it's redeemed. Maybe it wasn't actually a positive childhood experience rather than an adverse childhood experience. But what were the redemptive processes that come out of this? What have you learned about the previous abuses and the neglects and the shocking some of the behaviours and treatments you received and end up being party too? So how has that instructed and informed you as an adult man?
When we come against, or when we have opportunities presented, when we have opportunities to step into, whether it be education or further better yourself in your employment, whatever it might be, the positives have been where I have heard the importance of training myself up, and not just going with the flow. There's a discipline. I've had good mentors in my life that speak a lot about the discipline in life and how we, once applied, we can step forward in leaps and bounds. But there is choices that we are to make. We make choices all the time. Unfortunately, for a little rebellious kid, a lot of those choices were down a path of destruction. But good people come along. Good mentors. Sometimes you could just hear something that someone has mentioned in passing, and it's a light bulb moment, and it stays with you until you've got the capacity to actually build on it. Many opportunities positively have been made this way for me. So, I get my strengths through my spirituality. I get my strengths through my community and what's foundational around those, what keeps community together, what keeps my spirituality together. I certainly came to know our Creator, in the midst of a younger age, and which has put great perspective and purpose into my life, through my connection to culture, through my connection to community, and my purpose in what I do with my life. And so, yes, it's about, the positives have been about opportunities, and following them, and not just thinking that I could pick that up later, because that's where the discipline side of it sits.
Yep.
And so, not wasting time. So acknowledging that, yes, I have wasted time, and actually understanding that and speaking that to myself, to saying now is the time. Now, a lot of people I've met in the past who become new parents, that seems to be sometimes a time where they say, I've got I've got to stop misbehaving, and now I've got responsibility.
It's a catalyst for change, yeah.
It is, and that's the same principle that happened to me when good mentors were talking about discipline. You've got to be disciplined in this. You can't just pick it up for now and just put it down and think that you could pick it up later. At times that doesn't happen. Sometimes it can. So it's going and pursuing opportunities as best as you can with the disciplines, and having those supports behind you, your spirituality, your community, your safe space, that
good mentors. Yep, I hear all that. No, perfect, Steve. That's great, man. Well, to get sort of drill down a bit further, because obviously we're the Delgado Institute, as our particular focus is alcohol and other drugs and substance use, but along with all the other things, we talk about drivers and motivators and recovery and certainly resiliency and noise factors. What did alcohol and other drugs in your early years and those acting out years, did those begin to be part of that rebellion, or is that more of a self-medicating practice for you?
Look, I could use a lot of the language that many different circles use, but for me, once I started to explore my spirituality and started to understand my purpose in life, I saw all that I put into my life, whether it would be relationships, drug and alcohol, all these other vices, gambling, all these other things that came into my life, they are a counterfeit.
Yeah.
They're a counterfeit of the fullness in life I have found in my spirituality, my relationship with Almighty God, and my purpose in life. So all that other sort of vice and all that other stuff that had me addicted, even down to the cigarettes, it was all a counterfeit of a fullness and the deep infilling that I have in my days today. So yeah.
So was it more of a, just to jump in, was it more sort of, sounds like to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, mate, but it was more like, well, I'm acting out and this is just part of the deal. You smoke, you drink, you get on the gear. It wasn't so much, I'm depressed, life sucks.
I think a lot of that can come into it, absolutely. Sure. And it's like those 5 love languages. Which one do you speak primarily? Because we speak all 5 naturally. Which one stands out the most? Well, I think all of those experiences were a factor to why we picked it up. But really, again, it's going back to those initiation stages in culture. When you're with community, you stepped into your next initiation stage. Well, these experiments and this influence is only a counterfeit of your next stage. And so you can make up a story, you can justify it by saying it's from hurt, it's from trauma, but really it's in a sense another spiritual dynamic of your next stage. And it's a counterfeit to those that was sacredly held in community, in culture, for those next stage leading, for myself, into the manhood. And so you do take up the cigarettes and alcohol because your peers are doing that as a bit of a man.
This is what the grown-ups do, so let's do what the grown-ups do. Yeah.
This is what you're exposed to. This is what's become normal. This was rife in community.
Yeah.
And so these were just your next initiated stages.
Yep.
There was a great deal of that processing as well, just as much as what every other reason we bring into it to try and understand it.
Yeah, that's good, mate. I think it's important. One of the things we talk about in our seminars, we talk about drivers for drug use, and there's 4 major categories. A lot of subcategories underneath these 4. We understand that, but first one is called relentless pain. Now that's obviously trauma informed. The genuine trauma, I get it. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sustained in different areas, that creates what we call relentless pain, and therefore people want to medicate that. The second one is relational poverty, which I think you've spoken to a little bit about too. When we have genuine relational poverty, we should be, as children, mentored and grown healthy and safe and loved in our environments. When that doesn't happen, then we need to fill that hole. Recalcitrant hedonism is the other one we throw in there. That's just flat out plain, I want to party hard, rebels, screw the system, I'm going to do what I want to do. That's a huge informer of drug uptake. And the pro-drug activists like to think every drug user is trauma-informed, which is complete rubbish. And the last one I think you hit on beautifully here is what we call residing absurdity. The whole point of the meaninglessness is a very powerful factor that creates a whole bunch of issues in our world that make us chaotic. It's going back to a very old proverb, without a vision, the people cast off restraint. And so you got this absurdity, residing absurdities informs a lot of choices. Well, I don't know what this is all about, so I might as well just party till I'm dead or just feel different to what I feel. And they are very powerful drivers of substance use. But I love the fact that you're saying they are counterfeits, and they are indeed counterfeits. They do not fulfill, they do not complete, they just, in the end, they take. They deposit a little bit of whoopee-doo, and then they just withdraw from that account exponentially higher, and you become less and less with each engagement. So I'm really want to talk a little bit now about sort of how your mob works for you at the moment. Your mob, your culture, your connection. You talked a bit about that several times. You talked about your family, your culture, your community, really helping develop your ongoing living resilience. Tell us a little bit about your mob. How does that do that for you?
Well, I mean, my mob is who I'm surrounded by. Now, I grew up with my Dutch mother's heritage and culture just as much as I have been influenced by my Indigenous. I've always enjoyed the fact that I've got Scottish blood in me, so I'm from these mixed.
There's a whole lot of gags going through my head right now, mate, but I'll spare us.
But the thing is that it influences who we are.
Sure.
Whether it be by gene, whether it be by personality, whatever it is, we're influenced by all the different, mixes of culture, and that's who I am. Do I identify as solely Aboriginal man? No, I cannot, because I'm not. I am a man of Dutch, Scottish, and Aboriginal heritage, which influences how I think and how I live. And my mob surrounds me. I've got great both Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples who both influence and also I learn from, and I am taught by, whether it's positive or negative coming from them. I learn from them. Yeah. I learn what's safe. I learn what is safety. I learn a depth of what human need is from community and the mob around us, and I learn perspective of what's important, and again, they are made up by who has influenced them, and we are not alone in this mob. I don't see myself as a lone wolf, although I do like my own space sometimes. I love what country gives us, and my mob around me is the birds and the animals around here too. We learn lessons from everyone and from everything, and that gives me a spiritual depth. And so my mob are all those that the Creator has made, and it just doesn't it just doesn't extend only to their colour of the skin.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Now look, I like that community, and that's the beauty about, I think, a community geared around something beyond a one-dimensional element, whether it be sport or necessarily skin colour or hobby, or all those things are great and important, and they're all great little sort of glues in some sense. But when you've got a much more profound, deep insight and what adds value to you, and I think the term colonisation is used fairly and reasonably in a lot of settings. But every day, every way, in some respect, whatever we surrender to, we're colonised by.
Sure.
Whatever we surrender to, we're colonised by. And our thinking, and when people talk about, I watch people make statements, ideological statements for whatever reason, which is great. They have this great rant, and I say, well, and they might even refer to that as being on my perspective. I say, well, hang on. You realise that's the thinking of a Western European intellectual. Or and so that's colonising the way you frame your understanding of the world. Nothing wrong with it, but let's be clear. We're all colonised by something, but I think it's important that people learn to choose what they can be colonised by and why. And this is where truth and real community are powerful things. Truth's kind of been they try to erase that from the marketplace. It won't be. 2016, I think the Oxford word of the year was post-truth culture. Fascinating. So post-truth, and of course the first casualties of a post-truth culture are honesty, trustworthiness and integrity. They're gone because we don't have to tell the truth anymore. So honesty evaporates, integrity goes, and people say, oh no, it doesn't. Well, it does. You can't erase. Truth is about that which conforms most completely to objective reality. And I think that's really important. It can be discovered and it can be learned. And when you've got community around you that are helping, informing you to find best practice, for well-being, for health, for safety, for humanity, for dignity, those kind of things are very, very powerful. And we need to be informed by those. But what's behind those? What element is informing that? And I think we won't drill down much further into that. We'll get into the existential quandaries of the universe, and origins and all sorts of stuff, first order questions. But I think it's really important, mate. I think the mob that you surround yourself with is not necessarily a particular type, but it's people who value what is good and right and true, and they value what is going to add value to you and make you the best person you can be for your community, not just the best person you can be for you, which is so much of our individualistic culture now. It's like, what can I get? How can I get it? What's the best way forward? Rather than how can I be a person that is contributing to and adding value to my community, which is why you're in a community service provider space. You're manifesting the very things that you hold dear and that have been inculcated in your life. And that's really, really exciting, mate. And I'm glad we'll talk about that later on, about how that manifests itself. You've been obviously involved in community work for quite a few years now, and you work specifically, we talked about this with, but men, you work with different demographics, but tell us a little bit about specifically the work with men in the Indigenous space. What does that look like for you? What are some of the issues that you're constantly confronting?
How do we get our behaviour respectfully towards each other? How do we respectfully get our behaviour so that, we develop, wholesome, loving relationships with our significant others, whether that be your children, whether that be your partner, whether your mate down the road, holding those relationships safe, so we sit in a very unique behavioural change space, and we talk about areas in our behaviour we can improve by, I suppose, exploring what are our choices at the heat of the moment. In our thoughts and in our words, and then action, deeds, and it's about having those conversations. When it comes to the behavioural change, talking about domestic violence, talking about family violence. What is violence? For me, in the school ground, violence wasn't violent until it became physically violent, and I grew up knowing that violence was physically violent, and so anything else apart from that was just normal behaviour, or probably not normal behaviour, but it was just accepted. Yeah. Swearing at each other and pulling down each other and using totally inappropriate, bad language that causes a person to feel terribly unsafe in your presence wasn't violent. That was just attitude, and that was just seen as cool and or seen as tough and rough. But we talk about any environment you create that makes another person feel unsafe in is violent, and it's about having those light bulb moment conversations that bring change. That all right. So what I'm saying is creating an unsafe environment for my child because I'm not checking in on how I'm swearing and how I'm pulling other people down and how I'm challenging everyone by an inappropriate way and through an inappropriate behaviour and inappropriate conversation. For me, it didn't change until I understood that this was violence, and having those small groups, those intimate groups, those trusted groups that we hold in a sacred space, in a safe space, to be able to have the opportunity to be vulnerable, to talk about, all right, this is where I'm struggling, this is where I get it wrong, and being brave enough to name some of our behaviour as wrong, to be able to address it. This is the space we hold. So they're a very unique space. It's different everywhere we go. The cohorts of people, the audiences are all different. The conversations fundamentally can be quite similar because we're not far apart from each other.
The issues, systemic,
But, you know, it is a real privilege to be able to sit in that space and talk to men, because I work with the men, talk to men about areas that we can improve, that we can get right, that we can make radical changes. And this happens just like habits breaking and habits changing. It happens over time. It happens, you know, there is that lovely Bible story where, you know, that fantastic story that speaks about the field and the people that we work with in the field. There's a time where we will sow, there's a time where we will water, and there's a time where we will reap. And a lot of the time in these groups, we're meeting to sow those seeds that someone else who can come along and be a support and a guide and a mentor and a coach will water that. They'll find safety in that growth until they become actually where they grow and they become ambassadors for change. They become themselves mentors, and they become people that will influence their environment for right, you know.
Oh, brilliant. And that's what should happen from day one. As you said, a lot of the work that you're doing, that we're doing as well, is remedial. I mean, when deficits exist, when gaps are clear and profound, some are chasms, then if they're not met and they're not filled, then that vacuum creates its own problems, as you've experienced. Yeah. But once you start backfilling with good practice, best practice, care and community, and sense of meaning and spirituality, and all those factors that make up the holistic human being, the unit, that give us dignity and humanity and help us be those people. If they're not inculcated at start, then they have to be remediated, and that it's great that that's happening. Don't get me wrong; it's fantastic, but it's one of those unnecessary harms that we talk about that could be avoided. And when prevention and early intervention are in play, then a lot of these dysfunctions don't happen. And of course, the alcohol and other drug are symptoms of a bigger problem. And so those things, yeah.
Shane, I think they're always going to be with us. They're always going to happen. It's just that if we now can go through life with the tools that we can develop to address, or to even identify that this is coming towards me now, this aggression, this anger, these inappropriate thoughts, this attitude. If I've got tools in the bag, how can I exercise them? How can I promote them? How can I live them out? How can I offer a space in my environment that's safe to make alternative choices, or different choices, appropriate, good choices in those heated moments? And it comes back to when I was saying about those disciplines. You know, what we're doing in these groups are first talking about how can we do this different, and what are the disciplines needed, what are the tools needed in order to go away from here. And so we have little models, we take from little models that we can learn from all around, and apply it to ourselves intimately and personally in the groups that we hold, you know.
Perfect. I love it, mate. Look, that's fantastic. And I want to talk again, jumping in that space, because I think this is a really good segue. You talk about safe spaces, you talk about healthy, caring, loving, functional environments. I'm interested in the journey of and the whole process of welcome to country. And I've got one of our Dart think tank members is an adopted elder of a mob in Northern Territory. And he also is teaching an Indigenous school, and he runs a thing called Students in Action Reconciliation Seriously, and has some great Indigenous programs that we're party to. And he's shared a little bit with me about what that means from his gleanings and his interactions with people. So tell our listeners, particularly our international listeners, who would probably have zero understanding of this. We're not talking about acknowledgement of country; that's a different animal. But welcome to country. What does that actually mean? What is happening when an Indigenous group welcomes you to country?
Well, I mean that it's very complex in the sense that it has seen change over the years, and unfortunately, a lot of not amongst Aboriginal people, but in non-Aboriginal communities, it's so tokenistic by so many that it's lost its meaning, and even its meaning haven't been a priority or an understanding for lots of communities. But look, welcome to country. We can't speak around welcome to country without first acknowledging that acknowledgement to country is also hand in hand with it. For instance, this principle is right throughout the world, right? You trespass on someone's property, right, without the proper welcome and invite, well,
Yes.
you're breaking the laws, you're
Correct.
breaking rules, all right? And so that's in every country and every culture. Back in the old day, when and it didn't happen often, but when a stranger would walk onto someone else's country, because custodians know where their country is, they know their boundaries, they know their laws, and through initiations and teaching and learnings, they would know that there was a proper protocol on how you would enter a country that's not your own. And without following those protocols, without stepping into those laws, you were seen by the custodians of that country you're walking into as a potential threat. What are they doing here if they haven't made themselves known or welcome or made themselves known? They're a potential threat, and so there was great law around acknowledging that they're a guest, if you like. I'm using Western terms. I'm a guest here. I'm just letting you know that I've come. I'm from here. I'm from there. Quite possible they would have communicated all this stuff. Then the welcome was, well, you've followed the protocol. You've followed the laws. Generally now, we're going to tell you about country. So we're going to tell you where you can go, where you can't go, where men can go, where men can't go. We're going to tell you what is safe and where isn't safe. We're going to tell you about not all, but we're going to tell you about some of our laws surrounding the areas you're going to navigate through. And we're going to tell you what's safe. We're going to tell you what we require. We're going to tell you what we expect from you,
What's sacred?
Us, what is sacred. All those things will come into a welcome.
Yeah, wow.
And so the guest, the stranger, will navigate through that particular region safely because they've been welcomed into the rule and regulation of how they can be a guest in someone else's country or home. And so they're basically the fundamentals of it, which is no different than any place around the world. You don't follow the proper protocol, you're a trespass.
Yep.
And well, we've seen a lot of the signs, trespassers will be shot.
Yes.
So God forbid that happens. So
Sure.
there are I'll walk into I feel welcome enough to walk into my mum's home, and I'll always knock on the door though.
Of course.
I'm not going to invade, but for respect, out of respect, you just make yourself known. Back in the old day, Aboriginal people used to light fires. They used to clap. They used to make noises. They navigated a foreign area. They would make themselves known, and when they came across others who are custodian or others, they will acknowledge who they are,
Beautiful.
where they're from, and custodians will, if it's all done appropriately and by law, they would be welcomed into the safety of those lands.
Beautiful. So a person thank you, Steve. That's very similar to what I've heard. There's a bit of obviously an expansion of it. So that's great. I'm glad I've got a handle on that, because that does make sense. But now when it comes to, this is where I find this really, really quite distressing, because I think for all of us, and you've said it's not just the Indigenous culture, but most cultures, we want our space, our space, and particularly the Indigenous culture space, is one of safety. There are sacred places. There are protected places that the guest is not quite welcome into yet. It's like you said, you go to your mum's house, you knock on your door, hey mum, it's me, you walk in. Not a problem, right? You're just letting her know you're there. If I go to your mum's house, I've met your mum once, it's hi, Mrs. Butler, how are you? It's Steve's friend. Do you mind if I come in? And I'm not going to walk into your bedroom and check out your bedroom, whereas you do that automatically because you've got that level of connection. Now, when it comes to the sacred space, because Indigenous people didn't have any and you can correct me on this, but Indigenous people didn't have any intoxicating substances specifically. I mean, there's argument around kava, but intoxicating substances, or certainly didn't have alcohol and illicit substances. So how does that work when a culture that has all that going on integrates or interacts with the Indigenous community? What kind of mess does that create?
Well, it creates mess in every culture.
Of course.
You know, and again, it's through the impacts of how our communities have suffered that we become, I suppose, there are many in our community who have become an example of what that suffering looks like by being victims of these substances that have been, I suppose, invading. But
Absolutely.
I think any foreign object or any foreign thing that comes into the body, you know, like a disease or anything like that, will always affect you negatively. And these are foreign properties in any human being.
Correct.
You know, and just have a look for ourselves at what the cause of that is, you know, and the outcomes of that. You know, it's poisonous, it's tearing apart, it's destroying our spiritual understanding on our purpose. It's counterfeit. It's not just in the Aboriginal community, as we know. It's rife in every community, and you know, Aboriginal people are no different from succumbing to what has been not welcomed in the country, but invaded and
correct.
And you know, pushed its way in.
Yep.
I mean, you know, it was a part of a ration once. You know, alcohol was a part of a payment.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
And so now we're growing up in a society where this was payment. This was a part of a ration. You know, from sugar and rum and all these things that were just invasive and invading into what is moulding now our new communities.
Yeah.
So of course we're going to begin. You know, we're going to believe that we're going to know this stuff as being a part of the norm.
Yeah.
A part of our life now. It's only until recent years, over the last few decades, that we've been really speaking out about tobacco and the causes of drugs and alcohol. Before that, it was just a totally different community culture, you know, a setting.
And that's I think you hit the invasion word. I thought was very pertinent, because and again, I'm just going to clarify, the Indigenous communities didn't have any intoxicants that they partied with in their culture.
Look, I have read that there have been various gums and various things that are found in some plants that some tribes may have indulged with, but it's not. We're not talking about ice. We're not talking about the things that are surrounded us today, you know. So I would say no, but unsure.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I mean, but I'm thinking perhaps more on the party side of things. It's not like, for example, in North American Indian, some North American, Native American Indian tribes used peyote or as part of some of their rituals. Still not wise, and it's becoming to the fore now. But I understand that it's not. Hey, we're just going to go out tonight and get hammered on peyote because we want to get wasted. That wasn't part of the culture. But you know, the alcohol culture specifically, and now other substances are now coming in, and weed, which is, you know, God's created weed, doesn't exist anywhere on the planet. If a white man has never been there, then the chances are it's a natural plant which has got about 3% THC and enough CBD to interact with it and counteract it. But the stuff we got today is a highly engineered psychotropic toxin. There's nothing natural about weed at all. It is absolute chaotic disaster. But of course that can be embraced by subcultures as well. But what I really wanted to for me and for our listeners to look at what welcome country to country means, and that the invasion of behaviours, and particularly behaviours that bring toxins, active psychotropic toxins into our environment is a shocking breach of culture. And a lot of people I know that talk about welcome to country and acknowledgement of country, they use weed and they use other intoxicants quite openly and pretend they're all very culturally relevant, when in fact that couldn't be further from it. As you said, alcohol and other drugs is in every culture, and we know statistically that the prevalence of alcohol use in the indigenous culture is less than in the non-indigenous culture per capita. We know that. We know the data's in on that. Sure, it's a problem there, but as you said, it's a problem everywhere. When substances are brought into an environment and they are invasive and they are brought into an environment that is not safe, not protected, not with loving, caring relationships, not and with solid meaning and engagement with community, then of course those intoxicants are truly invasive and they do a lot of harm. Yeah, I think that's, and again, you've intimated in your previous comments, Steve, about when you're talking to men, obviously helping them step back from substance use is one of the clear factors in changing their behaviours. It's not the only factor, and it is an addition to other issues. But when that's taken out of the equation, behaviour change is a lot easier and a lot more effective. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an opportunity. Sorry, Shane, can you say that again?
Yeah, sure, mate. The question was, so when it comes to, you work with Indigenous men and community work, the alcohol and other drug issue, having that dealt with or having that dialed back,
addressed,
would make obviously behaviour change a lot easier.
Absolutely. I mean, if the more we address, the more we come against what is attacking community, what is attacking the law, what is attacking society, the more we're addressing it, the more we're coming against it in this what we call spiritual warfare, if you like, the better we're going to be, the better our culture will become. There has been so much lost, and there's a lot of sadness, and there's a lot of deep trauma and hurt around what we have lost. But what we say very regularly in the groups is that because it's also a holistic and spiritual dynamic, we can find what actually keeps us strong as community. We can get back what holds us together and what keeps us strong. And it's addressing a part of it, and a big part of it is addressing those cancers and those invading foreign drug and alcohol and attitudes, and communicating those things as normal. When we're addressing that, we've had commercials that talk about naming and shaming and calling out inappropriate behaviour towards our women, towards being with this attitude. It was the same with everything that harms the body.
Absolutely.
The spirit and the mind.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like that. We have a campaign. One of the things that's fascinating about the drug sector, the pro-drug activists have been very clever at mocking saying no to drugs doesn't work. They say, just say no to drugs. What a useless idea. Hang on a minute. We say no to violence against women. We say no to bullying. We say no to road toll. We say no to rubbishing Australia, but can't say no to drugs. So clearly there's an agenda. There's a cultural agenda to invade particularly a generation, to infect the generation with these psychotropic toxins. And it's all for the sake of an elite few at the top who want to have they think their controlled behaviours.
Well, it's those controlling behaviours.
Yeah, exactly. Their behaviours in recreational use of substances to be above the law, so they can.
I also question, Shane. Sorry, not to cut you off. I also question: is it, and we won't go down that rabbit hole, but is it a preparation to get us readied for just the loose use of drugs? Like we go to drugs for so many different reasons. And I work in aged care, and I know drugs is an absolute necessity for aging and all this sort of stuff. Now, is it just another way that we're getting community used to the language, used to that that's here to stay.
Normalising.
All these normalising
Yep.
false lies.
Yeah.
Look, I know I need Panadol, or I go to painkillers for some reasons, you know, a headache, but generally I'm you know, I've just gone blank, dehydrated.
Yeah.
And it's my body saying, Steve, you need to drink more water, boy.
Correct.
You know? And so instead of going straight to the drugs of painkillers, I should probably top up with water first, get my knee joints going better again, get my joints, get the replenishment I need, the right natural replenishment, and then I can continue on. But I will be honest, I have probably succumb more to, I'll reach for the tablet first, I'll reach for the drug to supply the need. And it will be a temporarily fix, even though it has done a quick little fix. And I think at times we can be conformed to that by drugs. And I've gone to this drug or that drug to temporarily fix the hurt, the difficulty, the boredom.
Boredom.
You know, all these things. I think there is an agenda, as you said. There is an agenda.
No, right. And so the process
is controlling agenda.
Yeah, interesting. We could talk about conspiracy theories, but trivialised drug use, normalised drug use, decriminalised drug use, legalised drug use, and then every single place that's done this, it is not added to the culture. Even when they try and talk about economic change, all it's done is diminish culture. And no greater example is what's happened in a non-drug taking culture like the indigenous culture and some other cultures in the world who've never used alcohol or other drugs. When they've been brought in, it's just decimated the culture. So these practices are actually cultural wrecking balls, yet we still have these insidiously loud voices in culture that are listened to by supposed gatekeepers of our society. People that are supposed to protect us, the government's supposed to protect us, create safe, healthy, productive environments, are entertaining this rubbish.
If they're keeping the people dependent, then they're keeping them controlled.
Yeah, we won't go to that rabbit hole today, mate. But yeah, it's another one. Hey, before we finish up, mate, and look, it's been really good chatting. Thanks for the candid sharing, mate. And I know it is a politically charged space that we're in for some. For most of us who are just trying to understand and learn and grow as communities together, this has been really informative, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this. But before we go, there's a question we like to ask 99% of our guests, not all of them, but when it comes to drug policy, the fence at the top of the cliff or the ambulance at the bottom, which one do you think is the best one?
Well, it's always prevention for me.
Okay.
You know, I've always been about what we've just said here. How could we have done that better? What could we have done different? What we've just done here, what we've just acted on, how could we have done that different? How can we have done that better? Yeah. So I'm always for the prevention of what's going to, as you said, decimate our culture. And so for me, I say no to drugs, and I truly mean that.
Best practice. Yep.
And that's my best practice, mate. I don't want the ambulance. The ambulance is only to scrape me up the road from when I had my motorbike accident.
I'm hearing you, mate. Fence building is the key. Yeah, no, we agree, but there's different perspectives. Steve Butler, it's been an absolute joy having you on the Unnecessary Harm podcast. And for those who are listening, I hope you've gleaned a lot from today. Until next time, stay safe and learn how to actually exercise your best protective factor and say no. Say no in the face of the cultural elites to substance use. Until next time, be safe.
Thank you very much, Shane. It's been a privilege being here.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.